Hello everybody, welcome back to Call to the Bar. So this is episode 8. Finally managed to get Jonathan Underhill on the podcast. We had to rearrange the last time. It was my own fault, but I'm really happy to have Jonathan here today to join us. Jonathan is, I've got so many notes written down about Jonathan as a barrister, so I'm going to have to just try and give it my best shot at remembering some of the points that I wrote down. But Jonathan is a criminal barrister at 3PB Chambers. Is that 3 paper buildings?
It was paper buildings, but because we've got bases all over the country now, it's the brand, if there is a brand, is 3PB Barristers.
Oh, 3PB Barristers. Okay, right. So 3PB Barristers. You also do some regulatory work as well, but it's predominantly crime, and you've got an interest in fraud and proceeds of crime act cases, if I've just said that correctly. Within that, you are on the CPS panels for the grades, so grade 4 for RASO, grade 4 for general crime, grade 4 for fraud, and then grade 2 for proceeds of crime act cases. And then is it for the Attorney General's list of regulatory advocates, is that grade 2?
Grade A.
Grade A, there we go. So yeah, because I get confused between the letters and the numbers. So in terms of your and also you've just been promoted to becoming a advanced inner temple advocacy trainer, and you're also an advocacy trainer for the Western Circuit as well.
Yep.
And you did the BVC from Cardiff University, and you got an outstanding in that as well. And you are basically just the top dog when it comes to barristers, renowned for your advocacy skills as well, which was all over Chambers' website. First class advocacy I think it was, and you also got Leading Junior for 2025 award as well. So in terms of your interest in financial crime and fraud, how did that start throughout you? Was that already there and established, or did that grow with your practice when you became a barrister?
It grew through the work that I did when I was pupil, to be honest. I never really saw myself when I was training through as a fraud specialist or anyone who had a particular interest or expertise in financial cases, but it grew out of the work that I did and the way in which I approached the preparation for my cases. Mm-hmm. So fraud cases are normally large, they're normally paper heavy, they can be complicated in terms of evidence and money movement and documentation. So the way that I prepared cases and the way that I dealt with that type of material meant that I was asked for, because the whole point was to try and keep things as simple as possible, remembering who you're presenting to. So although you might be more than capable of dealing with 100,000 documents and working through 28,000 pages worth of bank statements, the jury may not be. So it's all about finding your case narrative, building that narrative, but making sure that you are comfortable in telling the story that you want to tell to an audience that have to be there and may not find it as immediately entertaining or engaging as, for want of a better expression, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which is what the majority of crime is. So no, it wasn't something that I started with. It's something that grew, and it's something that I now do a lot of, but it is something that I now enjoy a great deal.
And in terms of when you are reading paper heavy bundles for like that financial crime, how do you manage to stay focused and interested in it as well? Because everybody knows that the drama in the courtroom advocacy happens in the courtroom, and the fun and the thrill of it happens there. But how do you keep focused in that when there's a lot of like bank statements, things like that?
So it all comes back to the purpose of why you're asking questions and the core story that you are wanting to tell as you're going through the documents. Now, it's not as immediately apparent from those types of cases what those two things might be. But the important thing is that always, always, always remember what your end point is. Even for the defense side of things, it's not just a case where you pick as many holes as possible, throw as much mud into the air and hope that some of it sticks. If you're preparing these cases well and properly, you know what your case theory is and what your trial narrative should be for your defendant. So always you're constantly looking at that massive paperwork and material, and you're trying to work out what you present and how you present that in a way that furthers your client's case, whether you're prosecuting or defending. So that's the most important thing, is to keep that in the core of your focus when it comes to preparation. But sadly, for those kind of cases, it's just hard work. Hours and hours and hours of going through things, working out what's disputed, working out what isn't, cross-referencing, and using modern and technological things to help you. So I don't do it on paper anymore. I do it with liquid text and PDF editing and Excel spreadsheets, everything that lets you drag all of that material together into something that's coherent, because ultimately you are the one that is going to be standing there in front of a jury, hopefully ensuring that they understand where you're going. So if you don't know where you're going, they won't either. So that's the whole thing in the back of your mind, always. Keep it simple. What's the straightforward story? How do I get to where I need to be using the material that I have? And then get help, to be blunt, whether that's in the form of a junior, if it's a really huge case, or if you're using technology to help you. That's always really important nowadays.
In terms of, I guess, like information management then, and try to work out what is relevant, and obviously you have to read through everything, I understand that, but do you think that comes with practice as well, and that becomes a skill that you develop, being able to look at things and understand whether it's relevant or not? Or do you think it all is relevant?
So, not everything is relevant. That's the truth of it. And one of the things that differentiates new practitioners in particular, and second six pupils when they're on their feet, and people who've been doing it for almost 20 years, is not that we don't read everything. Of course we do. Of course we review all of the evidence. But what you get with experience is you know where to start, and you know where the key bits of information are likely to be. So that's one of the things I think we're going to come on to talk about at some point later, is the difference between bar school and practicing as an advocate. And the sad truth of practice at the criminal bar at the moment is that there's a lot of work, there's too few of us, there's a lot of stuff that's going on and moving very quickly, and you're not going to be in the same place as your civil colleagues. You're not going to be having 3 or 4 trials a year that you have prepared for 8 or 9 months for each. You're going to be thrust a case at 6 o'clock on a Friday to start on a Monday. You can't be perfect. You would want to be, of course, that's right, but you can't be, you won't be. So you will have to take the case, look at it, see what you've got, work out what you need, work out what you don't, triage the problems, because there will be problems, and then you have to work through them in a logical and coherent way that prioritizes the things that means you can get the trial running. But I think it's a case that experience tells you where to start your process. And in fraud cases, a lot of them, the big ones I've got coming up next year, most of those, the money movement, so how money moves across various bank accounts and who's done what in terms of deposits and things like that, very little of that's disputed, mostly because it's evidenced. That's why there are 10,000 pages worth of evidence. It's because it's there. The key question is usually dishonesty. And it's either the Crown have got the wrong end of the stick here, and all of these deposits don't show what they say that they show, or they do show that, but I have permission to do any and all of it. When you get to that, it means that you can then differentiate between how you approach the case. Am I really arguing about what the permission status was of my client with all of these various complainants? Or am I going to have to go through everything line by line, point by point? And in those cases, do I need a forensic accountant to help me do that, to identify where the key issues are? But it's about triage, and it's about spotting where the issues are likely to arise. That comes with time. When I first started, it took me hours and hours and hours, every case, every single fraud case, because I started off in the fraud work in particular with a lot of benefit frauds, because they at the time were not prosecuted by the Crown Prosecution Service, they were prosecuted by local authorities. And that had the added bonus that you had everything at the start. Unlike the Crown, where they serve some papers and then they've got 6 weeks to serve the rest of the papers, and then they don't serve the rest of the papers, and you get drip feed throughout the process. Local authorities, you gave you everything at the start, but that meant that the first 3 or 4 of those I did were a nightmare. Up until 2 a.m, hours working things out, finding out what the law was, where I was finding certain things. But the third, fourth, fifth one of those cases I did, I knew exactly where to go. And then you can start honing down your preparation technique as to how things are dealt with.
So in terms of doing those cases then, and presenting them to a jury, do you think that to keep the jury, I guess, interested and focused, that advocacy is a really crucial part to those cases specifically? Or do you think that, I guess, I know advocacy is important in all cases, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you think you really have to hone in on trying to be a bit exciting and exhilarating for those cases to keep the jury interested? And if so, how do you do that?
So some of my colleagues won't thank me for saying this. There is nothing worse than a boring advocate.
Yeah.
And cases like frauds, like paper-heavy cases, like drugs conspiracies, where there's 50,000 pages worth of Encro chat messages or WhatsApp messages or anything like that, just going through it without direction is dull. And it's dull for the advocate, and it's dull for the listener. It'll be dull for the judge. It'll be dull for the jury. And the worst point is when you get jurors who are quite clever, and that happens more often than you'd think, who are ahead of you. They know where you're going. They know what the point is. They've got there first. And in their head is a little voice going, "I wish this barrister would shut up. I understand the point. I don't know why we're going through all of this." So every advocate will have their own style in terms of how they choose to present in court in a general way. But do your legwork. It is always very obvious when counsel is not as prepared as they would like to be, because there is no focus. There is nothing worse than an advocate who is faffing, who doesn't know which page in the bundle they're going to, who doesn't know which document they're trying to take you to, who doesn't know which part of these 29 volumes of bank statements we're going to be using, who hasn't provided or drafted a chart with colourful bubbles and agreed facts in them. So all of that comes down to preparation. And that's all slog work at the start, because when you're on your feet, it's sometimes said, and I use this example a lot when I train, think swan, very elegant on the top, and it all looks very pretty. But beneath the surface, you're frantically paddling as hard as you can to keep the whole thing going. That's what you should be aiming for. And one of the easy ways to do that is to make sure that, silly little things, jury bundles, make sure they're paginated properly, in a colour that matches across all of the pages. Make sure it's sequential. Ideally, make sure that you as the advocate have produced it so that you know what's in it and where things are. And it's not just I will check everything I think we need into this file and thrust it towards the jury box. If you're going to take the case chronologically, make sure your documents are chronological. If you're going to take the case thematically or by complainant, design your jury bundles to help you. The art of advocacy takes time, skill, and experience. The nuts and bolts of it can be learnt, and you can help yourself to do that by making sure that you've got everything that you need to support you. And it's amazing when I train pupils, when they've come straight from bar school, they are very used to drafting written work and preparation notes for somebody else to look at. So when they're drafting an opinion or advice, there's a set of marking criteria, which means that they're drafting it in order to pass the marking criteria. They're drafting their preparation notes in cross-examination as if someone is going to look over their shoulder to read them, even if they're not, in order to hit a certain criteria. The biggest thing an advocate can do to increase their effectiveness in the courtroom is find a mechanism of preparation that works for you. Whether that's, one bullet point surrounded by lots of arrows, whether that's doing what I do, where I have, in large trials, I have a cross-examination document where I have the topics that I want to deal with. If I'm referring to specific statements or specific evidence or specific messages, it's not particularly technically accomplished. I take the snipping tool on Word or Windows and I snip out the bit of the evidence that I want and I drag it into my documents. And then next to it, I put the page reference and then I put the jury bundle reference in a different color. And then I put any inconsistent statements in red underneath, in bold, in size 24. So if all else goes wrong, in a case where there are 100,000 pages worth of evidence, I have that document in front of me. And if the case is particularly long and there are 15, 20, 30 witnesses that I'm dealing with, I'll print it out. Because although I'm very tech savvy and I don't like paper and I work off screens, it's something very helpful in having that one document. And within that one document is everything that you need. So I think the short answer to the question is you've got to help yourself to be engaging. And that means focus, and that means knowing your direction. There is nothing worse than watching an advocate flounder because they don't know what page they're going to, or they don't know where the next bit of evidence is. Know your case, not just evidentially, but presentationally. How do I make this clear? How do I make this easy? A lot of the books that I read when I was at undergrad about advocacy, which were not my law textbooks, which was part of my problem at university, some of the old descriptions of the best, show the jury the way home, give them a path, give them a route. How do you get them from where you are to where you want them to be? What's the easy way to do it? Find the easy way, stick to the easy way. That doesn't mean you ignore evidence. It doesn't mean you're lazy, but try and construct your case in such a way that you can easily travel from one place to another. And if you do that, you'll take the jury with you. And that's the overarching point. You've got to bring the jury with you. And that means you've got to watch them. And that means you've got to look at their reactions. And that means that you shouldn't be speaking for the sake of speaking. Everything you do as an advocate should have a purpose. If there's no purpose, don't do it. No one cares. You've got to make sure that that's what your aim point is.
It's like anything, isn't it? It's like if somebody told you to do a presentation on a topic, and if you knew the topic inside and out, you'd do the presentation fluently, confidently, and you'd engage your audience. If you were reading off a PowerPoint, and it's just like simple things that you get taught at university. Don't read off the PowerPoint slides, and it's kind of what you've just said there about lack of preparation. Will just bore everybody. And there's so many times I've seen jurors fall asleep on the bench.
It's a pet peeve of mine. Training with PowerPoint, for example, great. Your PowerPoint should have 3 bullet points on it, maybe 6 words in total. Because if all you're doing is reading off PowerPoint slides, send them via an email. No one wants to be there. They can read, most of them. They can read your points. The whole point is you want them listening to you. So you have your 3 points and you say, right, these are the 3 things we're going to deal with. This is the first one. And then you give your presentation. Now your note will have everything in that you need, but you want your audience to be engaged with you. And that means if you give them everything at the start, they're not going to bother engaging with you because people are lazy. And I'm the same. If someone gives me a document to read, I don't want to sit and listen to someone read it out. That's dull.
So tonight's episode is going to be centered all around advocacy. We are really lucky to have you, Jonathan, explaining all the types of things that we're going to discuss tonight and touching on the topics that I've chosen, because obviously you are an advocacy trainer as well, and you are renowned for your first class advocacy. But just before I move on to the next question about bar course advocacy, there was a case that you successfully managed to represent the defendant on, and got the defendant acquitted, and it was the Crown's case was based solely on CCTV evidence and captured the whole incident. And I think it was on Chambers' website, it said that you have managed to secure an acquittal based on either your closing speech or cross-examination. I can't quite remember which one it was. How could you say a little bit more about that case and how you managed to do that?
Well, first things first, remember that we write the Chambers website articles.
All
so, well, I say we do, our marketing team assists us as well. So the case you're talking about was an attempted murder, which took place in Portsmouth. And we got halfway there. He was acquitted of the attempted murder. He was convicted of a Section 18, so causing grievous bodily harm with intent. In the circumstances, it's a good result, given that the entire incident was caught on CCTV. It took place in a nursery school car park, and my client was seen to drive into the car park, get out of the car, go to a car park 2 bays down, pull out his ex-wife from the passenger seat, slash her throat with a razor blade, and then go and sit and cry by the wheel arch of his car. So that was what we were presented with. That was a case where actually the vast majority of the direct evidence of what happened in the moment is there. You see it. So that meant that when I was preparing the case, you have to look at other things that can assist you. So you needed to look at what the build-up was. You needed to look at the state of the defendant, because our defense to the attempted murder was essentially twofold: lack of intention to kill, and lack of intention to kill influenced by him being intoxicated. So there's the issue immediately of, can you run intoxication? Yes, you can, because it's a specific intent crime. But that's always very difficult, because the prosecution will almost inevitably come back with the very glorious comment on drunken intent is still intent, which is exactly what they did in their closing speech. But what that meant was I had to try and find a way of getting the jury to not sympathize with him, but to empathize with him and consider really whether they could be sure of exactly what was going on in his head at that moment. And that's what the whole closing speech turned around. It was a discussion or a set of arguments that asked them effectively to take a wide view and then narrow their viewpoint down to the crucial moment, at which point I was able to say to them, look, the unpalatable argument, because advocates sometimes have to say and think harsh and difficult things, the unpalatable argument is that if he had really wanted to kill her, he would have killed her. There was nothing stopping him from doing it. But in that moment, when the Crown say to you that you can be sure that that's what he wanted to do, that's the one thing that he didn't do. And if you're left with that contradiction, how can you be sure? And so on and so forth. It was a tricky speech. I'm not going to lie. It's one of the tricky ones I've done in a while. And I was sat, a cup of tea, staring at the stars at 11 o'clock the night before, having drafted it, wasn't happy with it. It wouldn't, when I was drafting it and considering it, it wouldn't come together properly. It didn't sit properly. It didn't flow well. It felt disjointed and difficult. And it was only really when I got to court the next morning at about I got to Portsmouth at about 6:30 in the morning, and I was sat in Costa. Other coffee shops are available, but I was sat in Costa and I scrapped most of it and started the game, because it wouldn't sit right and it wouldn't hit the markers that I wanted it to hit. So I started again, and then it did, obviously. But it's one of those things where closing speeches are more than a speech by numbers. They've got, it's the one chance you have as an advocate, especially a defense advocate. You have your captive audience, the jury isn't going anywhere, and they can't. And it's the one opportunity you have to persuade them. And that's what it should all be about. You can put in stories and anecdotes, and it's been mentioned, I'm like, certainly by my colleagues, I'm quite dramatic when I give speeches. There's a lot of glitter, especially when there's no evidence that helps you. That's always useful as a toolkit. But it's the one chance you get to hammer home. So you've got to get it right. Yeah. And the thing that I think I hope that people take away from this, from an advocacy perspective, is that there are always those people who are naturally brilliant in every profession, in every walk of life. I'm not naturally brilliant. I had to work at it. And that's the thing. It's work, practice. You can learn the nuts and bolts. We can teach you that. That's why advocacy training exists. But to get really good, you've got to think about it all the time. So, when I won that case, well, I didn't think that I won that case, because if I'd have won that case, I'd have got him off both counts. But when he was acquitted of the attempted murder, he was very happy. That meant the difference in starting point for sentence of, I think it was 25 years minimum term for the attempted murder, whereas it was a 10-year starting point for the Section 18. So a dramatic difference for him. But one of the first things I did, as I was sat on the train on the way home, was I unpicked the speech a bit. What worked, what didn't, what felt right. Did that work? Were people reacting? Were people listening to me? And that's sort of my baseline for a speech. It's not, do I win, or is the client acquitted? My baseline for a good closing is, were they listening? Were they engaged? Now, they can be engaged and they can be listening and simply say, yes, Mr. Underhill, nice try, very nice. But no, absolutely not. We don't agree with anything you say. But the aim of the advocate in that moment is to make sure that they are going with you, that you've got them to go with you and think. So that's really sort of how I approach speeches. But we come back to the sort of the technical aspect of what I've already said, purpose. If there is no purpose to what you're saying, you shouldn't be saying it. All of your effort at trial should be, and this is where advocacy in the real world is very different to bar school. All of your purpose should be, what do I want to say about it at the end? Because if there's nothing that I want to say about it at the end, don't ask the questions. No one's assessing me. No one's going to give me a grade. If I need to get 1 point from a witness, I'll ask one question, then I'll sit down. The trial last week was a really good example. I prepared cross-examination for 8 civilian witnesses, and it was lengthy. I cross-examined 2 of them, because in the end, ultimately, when they got into the witness box and they gave their evidence in chief, they didn't come up to proof and they all fell apart. And they didn't give the evidence that they needed. And my client this week got very irate. Why aren't you asking any questions? Why aren't you challenging them? And I said, because I don't need to challenge them. Because have they said that it's you firing the gun? No, then that's fine. Because that was the only bit of their evidence that I was worried about, where they said, I saw the fat, blonde 20-year-old firing the gun out of the window. And they've now just said, oh, there were 2 fat 20-year-olds in the front of the car. A gun was fired, but I can't say who by. Well, that's enough. That's fine. So that's the evidence that you've got. So I've got what I needed to say at the end. Well, how can you be sure, even if they're not? Because they can't tell you. The Crown want you to say it's him. But if even they can't, and they were there, how can you be sure of it? So I don't need to do it. And that comes with experience. Sorry, I'm mindful of your plan. And
Sorry,
I'm
no,
excited.
I'm mindful of just me keep on giggling because of your one-liners are absolutely hilarious. I can now understand why you wanted to engage the jury so much because you are hilarious. So I mean, also another thing that I think I'd just like to say there is how refreshing, and I probably speak on behalf of everybody else that will listen to this podcast as well this evening, which I know a lot of people are going to. Refreshing it is to actually hear how such a remarkable advocate like you also still gets it wrong sometimes. Well, also you feel like you've got it wrong sometimes, that you scrapped your clauses and you redid it again. And I just think that it's quite nice for me to hear, especially because, you know, if you looked at your chamber's profile, you just think you also don't, you never have a struggle, you don't do anything wrong, and that's what it looks like. So it's actually, so thank you for saying that. Actually,
no, it's anyone who says that they never have a problem is probably lying to you.
Yeah.
We all have good days and bad days. We all have good trials and bad trials. And bizarrely, it's not often linked to what the case is about, or you know, how difficult your client is, or that can be difficult. But I did a case relatively recently against another member of Chambers, in fact, and it was a very unpleasant trial. It was a Rasso case. It was nasty. But having said all of that, it was very calm, delightful as to what's going on. So these things happen, and you just kind of go with it. But people get it wrong. I get it wrong, or I have an idea about what I want to do, and then it goes wrong. The skill is recognizing it and catching it before it goes wrong in the courtroom. Ellie, give me a sec. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Good, because these I think have died, which is fine because the chap next door with the drill has stopped drilling. So we can go on to main things.
Can you hear me okay?
No, don't be afraid to get it wrong, and that's why the sort of formalised advocacy training that the Inns do, and oftentimes that Chambers do when you're a pupil, are so important. Because it's a safer place to get things wrong. If you want to try something different, we're in a profession now where it's very rare for you to ever get feedback at all. So when you have the chance to get it, take it.
Okay, brilliant. So right, let's talk a little bit about the bar course then. So in terms of your experience with the bar course, I know that you no disrespect intended to you, but I know you did it quite a while ago. But just in terms of, I guess, your own experience combined with the fact that you are a accredited advocacy trainer, what would you say could be, and I know the bar course will never be perfect, and I know it's always going to be very different in practice, but what could you say that could be potentially improved with the advocacy aspect of the bar course?
I mean, it's difficult because I think there are two different purposes happening. There are two different reasons why things are the way they are. I mean, I'm old now. That's what you are very delicately reaching for. But I mean, I did bar school in 2007. Yes, I was called to the bar in 2008. So yeah, I started bar school in 2007. I didn't go to London. I did it in Cardiff. My advocacy, well, one of the reasons I went to Cardiff was because they did more advocacy per student than London did. And my advocacy classes were 6 of us, not 12 or 20. And back then, everything was recorded on DVD, which was just horrendous because you had to carry them around everywhere with you. And I know that my housemates, when I was at bar school, decided the best game in the world was to find them and then turn them into a drinking game, which was truly horrendous. But having said all of that, bar school, I think there is a disconnect between what the real world is, especially in criminal practice, versus what you are taught. But I don't think that's a problem, provided that you recognize that difference. A good example is, let's take a bail application. It's one of the first bits of advocacy assessment that I ever did at bar school. And there were about 8 or 9 of us in that course that were clearly destined for the criminal bar, because we were the ones going, well, just tell the judge what it is. Just, tell the judge what's happening. Tell them what's going on. And then all of the civil practitioners would be like, well, no, if you look at the Bail Act and the section blah, 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 it's like, that's not how it is. I know it's not how it is, because I've been to the magistrates court recently and I've seen bail applications don't take 25 minutes, they take 35 seconds, because that's the kind of speed that you've got to deal with. So I don't think there's much I would change, other than at least there being a recognition that it's different. The real world is different. But that's why I think the importance of having ongoing advocacy training can't be underestimated. So I was trying to think of a better example, a good example. Let's take cross-examination. The way that you're taught at bar school, there's a marking criteria. You will be told you must never, ever, 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 ever not lead. You must lead on everything. And the pattern is advocates make a statement and then put isn't it, didn't it, wasn't it, or didn't you on the end of it. That is perfectly fine. And it will absolutely pass you cross-examination in bar school. But you can always tell junior advocates, because that's all they do in court.
Wow.
You hit him, didn't you? That's when it happened, isn't it? This is what happened next, wasn't it? You were very angry, weren't you? Well, that's the proposition you're putting. Cross-examination in the real world, it requires more thought about it. It requires a little bit more flexibility. And I know this because my pupils, when I have pupils, my own, they will say, you're asking open questions in cross. Are you mad? The world will end. We know this because our bar tutors told us. And I was like, the world will not end, because, for example, to take that idea of asking a well-placed open question in cross, and I said, if you shut everything else down, then you can ask that open question. And I said, did it work? And they said, well, yes, of course it works, because you've been doing it for a long time. I said, no, it worked because I shut it down. When I got to ask that devastating why, they couldn't say anything, or more importantly, I was prepared for whatever the answer was, or I didn't care what the answer was. So that's a lovely example where, in order to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of the skill at bar school, there is an easy and formulaic way to ask those questions, to put those propositions. Whereas in the real world, you just come off as a little bit mechanical. And your small cases in the magistrates court, where there's been about maybe 10 minutes of evidence in chief beforehand, don't go through, so if the witness has just told you, I was standing outside by a red car on the street and there was a street light directly above me, and I could see the defendant on the other side of the road. Okay, what's your case? Your case is ID. So what bar school will tell you to do is say, basically go through that evidence again. It's right, isn't it? You were standing on the other side of the road. There was a street light, wasn't there? It was directly above you, wasn't it? Well, we know that. Judge has heard all of that. So what's your purpose? Your purpose is to say that you can't see across the road because it's dark. So you can do it in a different way. So cross-examination in the real world becomes, you didn't leave the pub until about 10 o'clock. Would you agree with me? And after the pub, you went straight to where your car was, and that was the red one. Can you think about the lighting? You've told us there was one street lamp, but there wasn't any more, was there? And that light was working, but it was directly above you. Can we agree on that? And suddenly it becomes discursive. And it's about tone, and it's about impression, without putting the isn't it, wasn't it, didn't it happen like that on it. The other one to avoid, like the plague, is I put it to you, because we don't live in like 1863. And much though many of us would like to think that we are, none of us are Marshall Hall. So there is this, as I said, I've gone off a bit, but there is this difference between cross-examination in the real world as opposed to cross-examination at bar school. I'm not sure there's a good or a right way of changing it, but I think it's important that there is a difference. And when you get past bar school, you start hitting what's called the Hempel method. So it'll be lots of headlining and give that a go. This is your headline, try it like this. Lots of individual one-on-one stuff. But it's one of the things that you just learn as you go through, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because when you, like, I haven't started bar school yet, but I think once you start bar school, I think the excitement of doing the cross examination and the bail applications and things like that, and then I think that people come out of it thinking like, to be a barrister you have to speak like one and follow these like really strict formats, and I think it just really, the end of lacking personality, a few I've met, which obviously I would never name, just rod up the backside, and I'm like, you're not even a barrister yet. Like, it's just cringe. And it is always that, didn't you and I put it to you, that type of language.
I mean, there's a generational shift in terms of that type of approach is often, but not always, more senior practitioners, because that's the way they learnt, and it's the same thing as you go through. I'm getting older now. There are people coming through who are far more technologically advanced than I am in terms of how they deal with their caseload. I'm having to learn new skills all the time. So it happens. But the one thing I tell my pupils, and the big headline I give my inner temple pupils and the NPP, so the new practitioners, stop trying to sound like a barrister. No one cares. Now, I caveat that with, I am a criminal practitioner, so my audience for advocacy is mostly normal people. So normal people do not progress along patrol routes in motor-propelled vehicles. Normal people drive cars on roads. Police officers are a great one. I was proceeding along my normally designated patrol route when I espied, no, I was walking along the pavement with my colleague when I saw the guy jump over the hedge.
Yeah.
You know, it's about that. Yeah. And I mean, the thing is that you don't have to sound like you've got a silver spoon in the corner of your mouth, even at the civil bar. It's about clarity and purpose, clarity and concision. You can do that, whatever your regional accent. You can do that, whatever your background. If you've thought about your case and you know where you're going, you can achieve those ends without sounding like something from Rumpole of the Bailey. It doesn't have to be that way. It's about being persuasive, and it's about being clear. And if you manage to do that, the judge will thank you, and so will the jury.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, from what my experience as well of doing, judicial marshal and things like that, judges do find it irritating when there's a barrister just rambling on and just basically putting loads of words together in one sentence. Doesn't actually make any sense at all. The judge is like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, read the room.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, still going to the Court of Appeal terrifies me. Still, almost 20 years in, every time I go, I feel like I'm a junior pupil again. It's horrendous. What made that vaguely easier was when I started to realize, because I attended the Keble College Advanced International Advocacy Training course, which is for practitioners. So I was a little older than most experientially. It's aimed at people normally about 7 to 8 years cool. But I went when I was 15 years cool or thereabouts, maybe a little more. That's horrific. Because at 15 years cool, I know what I'm doing. I'm a busy practitioner. I'm quite successful. So says my brain. I've got a full diary. Things are going relatively well. And then I spent a week being torn apart by one of the justices of the International Criminal Courts and 3 silks and 2 High Court judges. And they took me to task and said, "Why are you doing it like that?" And the answer was, "Because that's how it's done, isn't it?" And they went, "Why? Can you tell me in a sentence?" If the answer is yes, tell me in a sentence. Don't need a paragraph. You don't need to faff around it. Is the answer to the question that I'm asking no? If the answer's no, say no. And that was remarkable, because that, even as a more senior practitioner, having somebody turn around to you and go, we are people too, with busy lives and busy jobs. Can you be clear? Can you be simple? Can you be concise? Yes. If the answer to all three of those is yes, do it. So that's really important. And that's a skill that you have to keep working on. And I don't get it right all the time. And I know when I'm not getting it right, because the little voice in the back of my head goes, you're waffling. What are you actually saying? You've been on your feet for 20 minutes. Have you got to your point yet? No. Shut up. Sit down. Do the thing that you're supposed to be doing. So it's just the way to be the best advocate you can be is to think about advocacy all the time.
Yeah. And like you said, when you went after that case, the attempted murder, you went on the train and you picked apart the closing speech again, and you went through and analysed what went well, what didn't go so well, and that's after a successful outcome for the case, one that your client definitely will have been happy with, as we discussed, the difference between the Section 18 and the attempted murder starting point, but you still went and pulled that apart.
So one of the best bits of advice that I was ever given was by my pupil master, and I am old enough that he was a pupil master, not a pupil supervisor. But he said to me, right, after every case, you're allowed to give yourself an hour. In that hour, the first half an hour, you can congratulate yourself and say you're brilliant, or you can wallow in the fact that you think you did a terrible job and it all went wrong. For the next half an hour, unpick what you did. Put aside what happened, whether you won, whether you lost, especially when you won, because then the temptation is not to think you're a brilliant barrister and you're God and it's great. But that next half an hour, take it apart. Okay, I won, but was that cross-examination as tight as it could have been? Did I make a tactical decision that was wrong? Could I have thought about a different way of putting those propositions? Was that speech clear enough? I took 20 minutes to make that point. Could I have done it in 10? And that was before the Bar Standards Board decided that sort of self-reflection and self-analysis was one of the things that they wanted to include within the continuing professional development regime. But that was the bit of advice that he gave me. That and always polish your shoes. Both excellent pieces of advice, but the self-reflection one is one that I've stuck to perhaps more. But it's important to do that, because if you don't self-analyze and if you don't think about your advocacy, you won't improve. Oh, and the thing I've not said, which I should say, really, dirty secret that no one likes to talk about: steal stuff. If you're against the silk who has a brilliant way of doing something, nick it. If there's a turn of phrase in a speech that your opponent uses that you really like, steal it. I was against, it's Benjamin Newton Casey now, he's in silk. He wasn't when I was with him. He gave an amazing speech, which there were bits of it that I really liked. There's a story about the three little pigs and houses being made of different things and all the rest of it. So I loved that. It was great. And I said, oh, do you mind? I said to him, oh, I really liked how that played. Do you mind if I borrow it? And he said, you're not borrowing it, you can nick it. But I nicked it from a silk who took it from a silk that he knew. But Ben and I were chatting, and he said, oh, actually, I really liked how you did, because I did what I sometimes refer to as my watchmaker speech, which is in order for him to be guilty, so many things have got to go perfectly correct. It just can't be coincidence that they did, or rather the other way around, I suppose. In order for him to be guilty, so many things have got to fail to go wrong. How can he have planned all of this in that much detail? Because, ladies and gentlemen, you've seen him, and he can barely count his fingers and toes. Not a criticism, but the truth. How is this man planning like this? So it's the intelligent design watchmaker speech. And Ben said, I liked that as well. Can I borrow it? And I was like, yeah, I nicked it from Silk that did it in a fraud case that I really liked. So it sounds a bit flippant, but we're a collegiate profession at the moment until changes that may or may not happen start making that a problem. But learn from others.
Mm.
I,
Really funny that you just said that, because Gabrielle Courts actually said that on her episode as well. She said, yeah, I've stolen a few phrases before, and she said, and it's a really good thing to be doing when you're in your first and your second six, your first six more so, but listen to people that you are with for the day and take bits of their ideas. And a judge that I clerked gave me, he used to be a criminal barrister as well, before I became a judge, and he gave me a really funny speech that he said he nicked off somebody as well, and he said that everybody would know that the case was really difficult and really hard if he pulled this speech out, because it was just like, oh gosh, here he comes again. And it was basically like, said something to the jury along the lines of, if you had the opportunity to see the CCTV of the full incident recorded, would you say yes? And the jury said, yeah. The jury all nodding their heads, and he said, well, you can't be sure that he's done it then if you need the CCTV. And he said it was the worst one-liner, but he said it just always, it worked a few times.
So that one liner came to me from Rob Griffiths, who, well, I doubt he came up with it, but that was certainly said to me as well. The other one that I do quite a lot is, if a case is really difficult, you tend to sort of metaphorically pop the hood a bit, and you say, right, ladies and gentlemen, this is how being a barrister works. All right, this is what we're going to do, and I then start blaming myself for all sorts of things. I will tell a jury that I was a stubborn child, and that when I was a kid, if anyone told me to do something, I absolutely wouldn't do it because they told me to do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm not going to do is tell you to come to any particular conclusions. That's not it at all. All I'm going to ask you to do is do your job. But my colleagues know that I've got a difficult case. If the Dear Prince in the Snow story comes out, you're in a real difficult case there. But we've all got these things, and oddly, this fortnight rather has been a good example, because I was dreading. I'm on the Isle of Wight, which has a single courtroom, and it has a single jury pool for cases. And obviously juries sit for 2 weeks. So it is highly likely, and it's happened to me before, where at least 5 or 6 of the jurors that I had on trial 1 are then selected again in trial 2. And the worst time it's ever happened to me here, I did a trial on a Monday and it finished on a Wednesday morning, and then we saw a second jury on Wednesday afternoon to do a second trial, and 8 of the jurors were the same, which meant that in 1 week they had me giving a closing speech for the defence twice. And it got to the point where I was having to say to them, ladies and gentlemen, some of what I'm going to tell you, you've heard before, or at least some of you have. But that's the reason that I'm not shying away from that, is because it's crucially important. And it's very important that we have to go through it all again. So yeah, everyone's got sometimes what I call end links and gadgets, things that you use habitually. You've got like a standard, there's an opening that you like to use, or there's a closing sort of element section that you like. I've got one that I stole from a friend of mine in Chambers, which is, what was it? You'll all remember times in your life when you've been sure of something. It might have been the first time you bought a house, or the first time you said, I love you, or the first time you said that I do. But remember that you can sell a house and you can fall out of love and you can get a divorce, but you cannot undo the decision that you are about to make. So that's why it's so important that you take the time to really think about it. And that's one that I like quite a lot. But you've got to think about what suits different cases, I think.
It shows, doesn't it, really, how the skills of being a barrister go way beyond just the advocacy, way beyond just the expertise in the law, and actually the skills about being actually a personable person, being able to get along with somebody and being able to, I guess, have a conversation. You're trying to connect with the jury, aren't you? Trying to win their trust, really.
I mean, this is the thing to remember, is that practice areas are different. I am a criminal barrister, and predominantly I'm a criminal barrister of first instance. So I don't spend a great deal of my time in front of the higher courts. I enjoy the High Court when I'm there, and I have a different string to my practice. So I do all of my standard jury advocacy, but then I also do the food, health and hygiene, health and safety. That's different. That's a different way of dealing with things, because it's trying to do complicated things with complicated regulations. But you've got to work to your strengths. I am never going to rewrite trust law. I am never going to be that genius. However, I know what I enjoy and I know where I have identified my skill set as being, and that's jury advocacy.
Mm.
But that doesn't, but I think the key thing is don't get to bar school and then stop. Don't get through pupillage and then stop. Don't get through, because the last bit of formal training you're required to do is the NPP. So that's anything up to 3 years. So don't get to that point and stop and think, do you know what? I can do it now. All of it. I can do everything and I'm great. Carry on thinking about it. Carry on reflecting on it. Watch other people. Go and do voluntary training if you want to. Read books. Look at, there's loads of stuff on YouTube. Things like the 10 rules of cross-examination and then the 10 further rules of cross-examination, which of course means there's 20, but we don't talk about that. And then, find things that work for you. And if you're struggling with it, go and get help. I had a not speech therapist, a language coach. So I went to someone to help me with my language and presentation, and I did sort of 6 or 7 sessions with her, and then I did 3 or 4 sessions with a RADA coach as well. But that's because my background was in acting before I came to the bar, or I wanted to be an actor rather before I came to the bar. So, and again, I didn't do that immediately. I did that about a year and a half ago, where I wanted things weren't sitting. I was going through a phase where I didn't feel my advocacy was connecting or effective or persuasive in the same way, and I was worried about my tone and my speed. So I went and got help. So that's the thing. As I said, remember, there will always be people who are brilliant. There will always be people to whom it looks like it comes 100% naturally, and some of them it does. But for a lot of us, you make it look really easy. It isn't really easy. And it also, as I said, doesn't go right all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that as well. And one of the questions I was going to ask you is, if students come and ask you for a bit of advice on how to better their oral advocacy skills specifically, what would you say? But I think you've answered that question in terms of, reading books, going on YouTube. Is there anything you'd like to add?
So yeah, let's take one that doesn't necessarily require capital expenditure.
Yeah.
Record yourself, which I know everybody hates. It's horrendous.
Yeah, podcast back, it really makes you feel sick.
But it was far more difficult when I was training. You had to have like a camera, because although we had video phones, they were very bad. Now you are walking around with, in your pocket, a supremely excellent video capture device. So record it, watch it. Try and be really, really neutral. Do you stand at a funny angle? When you are giving a speech and you're saying something that you don't agree with, do you screw your face up because you're not really happy with what you're saying? Do you do what I did, which was, I used to, if any of you seen the movie Goldeneye, Boris, that's Alan Cummings' character, he rolls a pen around his fingers. That's how he dies, because he blows up the bomb in the pen at the end of the movie. But I used to do that when I was asking questions. And I didn't notice that until I watched it back. I used to sway like I was on a ship. I used to make people feel ill because I'd be doing this as I'd be speaking. So the one top tip that you can all do, record yourself, give a speech, ask some questions, because advocacy goes beyond the. So we know you're a good lawyer. You wouldn't be here otherwise. We know you've got the law. We know you've got the basics of advocacy by that stage, because otherwise you wouldn't have gotten through bar school. Advocacy is about more than that. Advocacy is also about taking up space. It's your time. It's your time. Use it. Stand there, proud, straight back. Stupid physicality, things like that. It's your time to take up the space to make the arguments that you want to make. Don't retire from it. If you're an advocate that shies away and isn't, and is nervous from your points, you're never going to be persuasive. And I don't mean shout louder or wave your hands around or do any of that. That works for some people, that some of the most devastating advocates I have seen are quiet, they are considered, they are calm, but they are absolutely horrendous when they're cross-examining your client because they take them apart. And there's no bells and whistles and there's no fireworks and no one is shouting and crying and wailing, but just forensically, they are phenomenal, but they are utterly engaging. They're not dull. And they've worked on that over time because that doesn't happen automatically. So yeah, read widely. I can give you a book list if you want one. Yes. Record yourself, watch other people. Those are the three.
And in terms of, I guess, advocacy in the courtroom, then, just before I wrap the bar course advocacy as a whole, in terms of advocacy in the courtroom versus advocacy on the bar course at bar school, is there any advocacy exercises in court that are actually easier than what they are taught on the bar course at bar school?
Oh, most oral applications. So
into this on the bar right now and probably feel that sense of reassurance to feel like they're doing awful.
So bar school is horrendous. It's a year-long endurance challenge. And especially now, because you're not just doing that, you're doing bar school and you're doing mini puberties and you're doing work experience and you're trying to pad out your CV and you're trying to do everything else. And maybe, just maybe, you might want to have like a social life as well, maybe. But again, remember that bar school requires you to demonstrate the skills in the way that they can monitor and mark. So, you know, a bail application. I have never, ever in my entire career referred a judge to the Bail Act, ever, because they know the Bail Act, because they are a Crown Court judge. I've referred to the tests. So when I've said, you know, you want the prosecution object to bail on the basis that he will commit further offences, fine. I haven't said, can I take your honour to Archbold, chapter 4, subchapter 4.3.1, and then can I take your honour to the 1956 Bail Act? And can I take your honour, please, to subsection 2 of section 1 at paragraph A? Well, your honour will see that one of the tests that your honour has to consider is whether or not the defendant will, whereas at bar school, you've got to do that kind of signposting and everything else. No, your honour, there are 3 reasons why we object to bail. The first is that he will commit more offences. The second is that he will contact the complainant. And the third is that he will skip the country. In relation to the first, he has 28 previous convictions whilst on bail. In relation to the second, he's already contacted the complainant twice, and we have that on video footage. And in relation to the third, we arrested him at Heathrow Airport. Those are my submissions. There you are. Done. But that's a difference. You're not going to pass bar school by doing the second one. You're going to have to demonstrate that you know how to do the first one before you stop doing it and then start doing the second one.
So just endure bar school, and then when you get into actually real life advocacy, you'll see the change.
Don't tell anybody that I told them just to endure bar school. No, love bar school, get great grades at bar school. But remember that when you leave, things will change.
Yeah.
There'll be a whole different set of challenges. You know, Thursday night at 10 to 6, when you're on your way home thinking, my God, thank God this week is done, the clerks will say, actually, sir, can you go to Anglesey tomorrow for 10 a.m? Or rather, you're a pupil. You are going to Anglesey tomorrow for 10 a.m. Papers will be in your email when you get in. Thanks, click. That's a different challenge. But that comes with practice. That's also with being in practice.
Okay, so now if we could talk about some, thank you so much for all of that, actually, it's so helpful. If we talk about some skills then, what would you say your best skill is, and what do you think makes your advocacy so great?
We've covered off a lot of it. My best skill,
hilarious, actually, is one of them.
I think probably multitasking and being able to really kind of cut to the point. So I suppose it's analytical skill. I think is probably the best skill that I have, is getting down to the point and working out what you want to do with the information that you have. What makes my advocacy so great? That's a lovely question to ask. We've covered off most of it, I think. But the headline, the one thing that constantly cycles through my mind: purpose. Why am I asking? Why am I speaking? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What's the purpose of what I am doing? Because it all ties together. With good case preparation, you know exactly what your case is. If you know exactly what your case is, you know exactly what you need. If you know exactly what you need, you know exactly what you have to ask. And if you know exactly what you have to ask, you can do it clearly, concisely, and in a way that engages and persuades. So that's your route, I think.
In terms of written advocacy, then, is that just quite, I guess, like A, B, C, D? Can you be colourful with that as such? Maybe is the correct question. Where with your oral advocacy you can, with written advocacy, can you, or is it just kind of like you're ticking a box because it's getting sent to the judge or the Crown or defence?
So this is where perhaps I part ways with others. Written advocacy is still advocacy. It is not there to tick the box to say, I've done the scouting argument. No. When I've just come off the back of pupillage interviews, some of the feedback that I've given to the prospective candidates: you've written your skeleton, you've taken a lot of time to do it, you put a lot of effort in, so use it. Because oftentimes we get the thing where someone says, does your lordship have a copy of my skeleton argument? And I, as a judge, or a fake judge, will say, yes, I have it. And then they go, okay. And then they launch off on this glorious set of oral submissions, none of which are linked to what they've written on the page. So why bother? If you don't work hard, work smart. If you're doing written submissions, do written submissions. But then we come to this question that always vexes people. There is a difference between written submissions on a topic, i.e. those which are not going to be augmented orally or are not designed to be augmented orally, and a skeleton argument which is. So keep it short. Judges are busy. They do not want to read War and Peace. Even in really complicated cases in the Chancery Division, in the commercial courts, in the construction courts, there are now, don't ask me what they are because it's a long time since I've looked at it, but there are procedural rules about how long your skeletons are allowed to be and how long your written submissions are allowed to be. There is a cutoff. And there's been a couple of cost cases recently where the High Court judges have said, this is ridiculous. I don't want 40 pages. Your cutoff is 20.
Okay.
Why did you take? So my skeletons now, if I'm taking more than 3 pages, it's very complicated. But again, it's about picking, again, when you're at bar school, you know, introduction, facts, legal framework, submissions, you know, you're setting out the law here, there, and everywhere. A Crown Court judge in the busy Southampton Crown Court Centre knows what bad character is. You do not need to quote section 98 at him. He knows that the test is propensity. You do not, or one of the tests rather, is propensity. You do not need to quote section 101D at him. You know, so it's about, again, we're down to the same principles: clarity and concision. Avoid, it's been sometimes said in this way, avoid really flowery language. Leave the flowery language for the oral stuff. If your opponent hasn't done something on time, don't write in your written submissions, it is inconceivably preposterous that the defence have utterly failed in all circumstances to do what they were required to do. No one cares. What's the point? Point is they failed to do it. The defence was directed by the 1st of January to provide a schedule of costs. They have failed to do so. Full stop. That means the following: A, B, C, D, E. So even when I'm doing written advocacy, the way that I always start with that, what do I want? Paragraph 1. This is the Crown's application to reduce bad character. What do I want? Why do I win? The bad character is admissible for the following 5 reasons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 pages, done. Also, on practical nuts and bolts, make it easy to read, make it pretty. I cheat. I have a template. I have a styles template for all of my written work. So it all looks the same. So the spacing is right, the font's the same, the sizing's right, all the headings are the same, they all flow. My headings run A, B, C, D, E, and then the subheadings are A1, A2, A3, A4. And it sounds really silly, but if a document's easy to look at and easy to read, it's going to be immediately more persuasive on a practical level. Plus also things like the Court of Appeal, Criminal Division, they have the Blue Book. The Blue Book is the procedural guide. The procedural guide will tell you things like what size the font has to be, what size the spacing has to be. The Blue Book thought it was necessary because advocates would not get to the point to put in the criminal procedure rule that says within the first 2 pages, you must tell us what your grounds of appeal are. You'd have thought it would be logical. Paragraph 1, little a, or, I provide advice and grounds of appeal. The grounds are as follows: 1, 2. But people weren't. They were taking 7 pages to get there and then burying the grounds somewhere in the middle of it. So it's all about clarity and brevity when it comes to written work. So I think it's a different skill, but it's an equally important one.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say the most difficult oral legal argument is to make orally that you've come across?
I'm not sure. Anything that's really legally complex. Okay. Anything where you're dealing with, I can tell you, yeah. So I did one where I was in the High Court in front of Mr. Justice Farby, and we were faffing around with statutory interpretation. And it was a food, health and hygiene case. So we were flitting between domestic regulatory frameworks and then the EU directives from which they were derived. That was hard because you're dealing with lots of different things. And any oral or legal submission where you're dealing with, where you're having to draw in evidence to your legal submissions. Again, though, we come back to the point that I made at the very start, nothing worse than watching an advocate flounder. So this is another little top tip you might want to think about. There is a difference between a skeleton and written submissions, but there's also a difference between a skeleton and a speaking note. Speaking note's mine. So I take my skeleton, which is a tight 2 pages, maybe 20 paragraphs, and then I copy and paste it into a speaking note where I put all of that in blue and I blow the font up so I can see it when I glance down at my notes. And then where I've put my point and my argument in 2 paragraphs, underneath that's where I put everything I want to say about it. That's where I put all of my cross references and my evidence. So when the judge says, well, Mr. Underhill, I understand your argument, but what do you say about this? And you can say, oh, yes, my lord. That's at page 83. And can I take your lordship to that? That will be in the red bundle at page 9 or divider 9. Everybody gets there. And as your lordship will see from paragraph X, which I've snipped out and put in my note. So again, make it easy for yourself. It's all about planning, all about preparation. But yeah, legal submissions where you're flitting between documents or you're dealing with complex legal topics, they're hard. They require more preparation. You can't wing those.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what about you then and your proudest moment so far in your career and why you are proud of
that? Proudest moment in my career. I have 2.
Yeah.
One was the incredibly low-level case, which for a jobbing advocate, for jobbing lawyers, it was a Section 4 Public Order Act offence in the mags, summary only, was worth a conditional discharge, maybe a fine. But for that client, it was everything, because it would have ended his career, it would have ended his profession, it would have changed his entire life. Getting him acquitted on that was a very proud moment, because that was one of those horrible cases where I didn't think that he'd done it, and they're always the most difficult. If we work on a rough rule of thumb, that if I defend, in 90% of the cases, the client probably did it. In 60% of the cases, the Crown can probably prove it. But then you've got that 10% of cases at the top where you don't think they did, and you don't think that it's right. And those are very, very stressful. But the proudest moment I ever had, I think, was when I was abandoned by my leading counsel in a murder case. That sounds very dramatic. He was made a judge between us securing a conviction and us doing a sentence. But what that meant is that I had to do a sentence on my own in a murder in front of Mrs. Justice Cutts, with Sarah Jones, KC, defending. And the proudest moment in that was I managed to get through the victim impact statements without crying, because I was not going to cry in front of a full courtroom of people. But that was really tough. That was really hard. And that was for that I was very proud to get through, and get through well. And to be told afterwards by other counsel that I had done it well. And that meant a lot to me, because you don't, as I said, you don't get feedback. So when you do get it from your colleagues and it's unasked for, that's quite a proud moment.
Wow, have you ever cried in any cases?
Not in a courtroom. I've done it outside.
I've actually saw a judge cry in a couple of judgments. They've actually audibly cried as well.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've come close, and it's always very, very difficult when that happens. But no, normally I've done the have a break and then gone outside and sat. Back when I used to smoke, I don't now, but when I did, it was the easy thing to do. You could go outside, you could hide yourself around the corner, and you'd be there, tears running down your face, puffing away on your Richmonds. And then it's no, I'm fine, come on, wipe it all away, wig goes back on, and then you go. But we are people, and it's something that people forget, is that the cases do have an effect on us. It's how you deal with them that's difficult. And that's the only good thing about the collegiate sort of robing room element, is there will always be support there for you.
Yeah. Absolutely, and thank you for sharing those two proud moments with us. They were really touching, and I mean, that must have felt amazing to be able to help that first client. And also,
I was only about how old will I be? I was only about 27, and I hadn't been on my feet very long, and it meant a huge amount to me, because he didn't trust me very much, because he thought I was too young.
And you've never forgot that neither.
No, it sticks with you. You can't get rid of it.
Yeah. So just before we move on to cases and parts of the trial, sorry, I am aware of the time and I've kept you really long. There's just been so much to talk about. But would you say there is a most important part of the trial?
As an advocate, preparation before you even get there. That's the most important part. During the course of the trial, no, there are more fun parts. Speeches are fun. Witness handling is fun. But as far as an advocate's concerned, preparation, most important part of the trial. If you get it right there, the trial will run smoothly. If you don't, it's going to be a disaster. What's
your favourite part of the trial?
Speeches, without the shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
And do you prefer opening speeches or closing speeches?
Don't like opening speeches. Very boring. Much prefer a closing speech.
Okay, cool. And how do you? So one of the cases on Chambers' websites was the 2023 Grindr rape, and there was complex Section 41 legal arguments within that. How did you tackle those arguments? And back to that question, I guess I asked you earlier on as well, in terms of difficult legal arguments, would you say that Section 41 is a difficult piece of legislation?
Yes, because it's often not understood properly. sometimes even by judges. And from a defence perspective, if you are seeking to deploy it, there is often a perception that you were trying to do something that you shouldn't be doing.
Treading on thin ice type of thing.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, the Section 41 stuff in that particular case was, well, the Crown made a rod for their own back because they wanted to adduce material that, frankly, wasn't really relevant, and as it turned out, fundamentally undermined their own witness. But that made the Section 41 argument easier because it was a twofold argument. The first was to adduce a video of sexual activity, which was never going to go in. But I wanted to fight for it. The second was to adduce a schedule of images that had been sent back the other way from the defendant. I'm so sorry. From the complainant to the defendant. That was fine because we went under the rebuttal route. So it's Section 41(5), which is when the Crown have got something in, you can come in as well. But that requires time. So that was, I remember it because I'd gone into chambers on a Sunday to prepare the case properly about a week in advance of the trial. I'd read it before and I'd had conversations with the client, but it was time to sort of put it together for trial. And I spent the entire Sunday going through Section 41. And I've got a flow diagram with literally, is it this? Go here. Is it that? Don't, no, inadmissible. If this and there, why are you trying to admit it? For this reason, this reason, this reason, or this reason. If it's any of these reasons, the answer is no. If it's not one of those reasons, carry on. So I've got one of those that I drew up to help me through it, and it's just complicated. Section 41 is particularly difficult because where you want to ask questions that otherwise would be inadmissible because of the operation of Section 41, you have to, and a lot of advocates don't like doing this, you have to write them down, the actual words of the actual question that you actually want to ask in the form that you want to ask them. Because if you don't do that, the judge is going to find it much easier to say, actually, no, I don't know where you're going with this. I'm not going to let you deal with it. Other than that, it's just tough. Lots of coffee and taking things really slowly, and proofreading a lot.
Yeah, I guess it's that I hosted Lee Fish last week and we spoke quite a lot in depth about Section 41 for anybody who wants to really go on with that. But yeah, I think he said exactly the same thing that you've just said. It's a really can be murky waters if you're not careful, and judges feel the same as well about it in his experience, and you've just got to be a bit careful.
Yeah, you've got to be really careful. You've got to really have a good reason. Yeah. It's not a fishing expedition. You've got to justify exactly what you're doing and why. And we come back to this point again. What's the purpose? Not because the client thinks she's a bitch and he doesn't like her. And that's usually the way around the gender split goes. Just saying, that's usually what we see. That's not a good reason. Yeah. And that then falls back onto your soft skills, where you're saying, actually, the conversation I need to have is really with the client, saying, look, I know you don't like her. I know you want to drag her through the mud. It's not relevant. And it's not going to happen. It's going to make you look bad. It's going to make me look like an idiot. I'll do it because I'm your brief. But you're not going to win. It's going to make you look bad. It's going to achieve nothing. And even if I do get it in, what am I going to say about it later? So it's just really hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. So last question then in terms of that one, before we talk briefly about the advocacy trainer and your court within Inner Temple, your role within Inner Temple, sorry. Are you going to become King's Counsel anytime soon?
This is where the pasta syndrome sits in, and everyone has it, doesn't go away. I'm not sure I'm good enough to be honest. I've looked at the form this year because you can download it in the window. There's a window every year, and you can download it to look at it. It's lengthy, it's expensive. I think it's what, 2,600 quid to apply every year, every time you do it. The stats aren't great. I think of everyone who applies, I think something like 80% of people fail the first time round.
I've heard,
So
I've heard
yeah,
that.
so the short answer to your question is don't know.
Okay.
Might think about it, but don't know yet.
I can definitely see the Casey at the end of the
Yeah,
name.
but
And my,
yeah, but my name would be my name's so long anyway. It wouldn't fit on any boards anywhere. That's the problem.
I know, yeah, imagine if he became a judge. He's on a judge. Jonathan
Yeah,
Underhill Casey.
yeah, no, absolutely not. I'm definitely don't want to be a judge.
Uh, right. So, in terms of the fact that you got the news that you are now an advanced accredited advocacy trainer for Inner Temple, what is your role then? Of course, the obvious that you train people, members of Inner Temple, or I'm guessing advocacy weekends and advocacy events and things.
Yeah. So I do both. I do the residential weekends and I do the sort of evenings and weekend slots up at the Inner Temple. I also do it for the Western Circuit as well. So every pupil has to go through it. Every NPP has to do it within the first 3 years. And I alternate between doing submissions advocacy, witness handling, and new practitioner stuff. The NPP stuff is really good because it's got experts in it, and we have real ones at the Inner Temple, so we get real forensic accountants and real doctors come for the weekend, and we get to cross-examine them, and that's terrifying. Even as a trainer, that's terrifying because if you get it wrong, you look like an idiot. But it's really important to do it for the really important to do it for people who are doing the training. But I become a much better advocate for like the time afterwards because I it then forces me to think about advocacy for like a week or two because I'm there going, I can't legitimately sit there and go, don't do it like that, do it like this, and then not do it like that in all of my work. So yeah, no, it's good. I enjoy it.
And what would you say is quite unique about the Inn of Courts, Inner Temple's training? That
There's a lot of it, but also there's a genuine sense, I think, of people caring about young advocates as they come through. They are quite robust in terms of how they train their trainers. I had to go do a weekends training to do it. And again, I think there was bar students came in to do that, so they could be our guinea pigs whilst we were training them. But yeah, it's not a walk in the park. You don't just kind of sit there and get to a certain level of seniority and they go, oh, you're all right, you can do it. You've got to demonstrate the skill set. You've got to go through it all. You've got to make sure that you're comfortable and confident in doing it. So I think the Inner Temple has an excellent approach to advocacy overall, which I think works really well.
brilliant. And so just quickly touching upon pupils then and pupillage process. So you've mentored a couple of students going through the pupillage process. I think it was 4 the last time we spoke. And what is some of the advice that you give to them, whether it be when they're tackling pupillage interviews, or if they have managed to secure pupillage?
So I think pupillage interviews, be yourself, because as I've touched on, by the time you get to that stage, especially if you're an interview, so that means you've probably gotten through a sift of some description. And certainly a lot of sets do 2 rounds of interviews. So if you're in the second round, you're a good lawyer, we know that. You've got the academics, we know that. You're in the right place. So what I'm looking for is somebody who is a person, not just a law spewing robot. Because ultimately, if it all goes right for you, you're going to spend the next 30 years of your professional career with these people. So you're looking for somebody who knows what they want, who is comfortable and confident and outgoing and can demonstrate that they really want to do the job. And I have a slight bee in my bonnet because this was the only job I ever wanted to do. So I find it difficult when there are candidates who are like, oh, I don't really know what, if you haven't got a good answer to why you want to be a barrister, then that immediately kind of puts me off. But having said all of that, I know this is a little bit like saying, please go and push this water up the hill. Try and relax. Most people are very nice. Most people are very calm. But again, we come back to this proposition: preparation is everything. So you can demonstrate your advocacy skills even when you're not doing the advocacy bit. So I know in our chambers, we give people an advocacy assessment to do. So it's the make this argument, write this skeleton. But when they say to you, can you give me 3 reasons why you think you'd be a good barrister? That's advocacy. Isn't that just submissions advocacy? Or make it even more obvious. You get the question, can you tell me 3 things that you're, or tell me something that means that you're most proud of what you do? That's a really open question, but you can say, right, all right. So there are 3 things that I want to tell you about that I'm very proud of. And the first one I want to tell you about is this, and I'm very proud of it for these 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Second one I want to tell you about, you're demonstrating that you can signpost, and you know where you're going, you know what's going on, you know what's happening, and you're being clear and concise and persuasive. So you're doing all of that in the questions themselves, not just the specialist advocacy bit that happens.
Yeah,
so
and
I think that's the most important thing to remember.
And in terms of any advice that you'd have for anybody then who potentially gets a little bit lost when trying to compile their thoughts together, so if they just get a little bit, what advice would you give to somebody who maybe finds it a bit difficult to articulate what they're trying to say correctly?
Slow down, take a breath.
Yeah.
Take a notebook, take coloured pens, find anything that works for you about how you can organize your thoughts, because everybody works in very different ways. I'm very visual, so if you look at my notes, it's different colors, it's different shapes, it's that's really anybody but me. But find a way that works for you. But in terms of communication, organize your thoughts before you speak. Out that silence. If it's running into a minute of silence, you have a problem. But no one's going to worry if you take just a few moments to organize your thoughts. And if you're really panicking, you can say, I said it to judges, Your Honour, that's an excellent point. Can I take a moment just to digest it and to think about how I want to respond? And the judge will say, of course, Mr. Underhill, you take that moment. And then you can take a breath, calm, and then deliver your no doubt wonderful oration at that point.
Well, amazing. Okay, well, Jonathan, thank you so much, everybody. That was Jonathan Underhill this evening on tonight's episode. Jonathan, please may everybody add you on LinkedIn. Can they get that permission from you to connect with you if you don't mind?
Yes, you can. I have no problem with that.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Thank you. And I would just like to say thank you so much. I think tonight has been fantastic. I've definitely learned a lot and took a lot away with advocacy, purpose, clarity, being concise. I think those are like the 3 overriding themes throughout. And yeah, just being a human being. And it's just been an amazing opportunity to have you on my podcast as well. I'm really proud of it, and I'm really honoured to have had you on. And I think if I ever got asked to people in an interview, what's your 3 proudest moments, I'd have been like, obviously having Jonathan Underhill on podcast. But no, I'm really grateful. And thank you so much for giving up your evening, despite being really busy as well with other cases and things like that. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, I'll only say thank you very much for having me on. I know it can be difficult finding people, and I know it can be difficult listening to us witter on all the time, but thanks for having me. Also, if people want to reach out and get in contact, I have no problem with that. I will always respond, even if it takes me a day or 2, because I'm normally, as you can see, in someone else's house preparing the trial for the next day. All right. But yeah, no, more than happy to do that.
Yeah, and hopefully I will, because my inn of court is in Temple, so hopefully I will see you at some sort of advocacy.
Well, best of luck. You will probably see me at some point in the not too distant future, I hope. All right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Jonathan. I can't thank you enough. All right, have a nice evening.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.